Hey everyone, I'm W. Frank Walk, comic book colorist and creator. Today I'm going to be sharing with you my simplified subtractive method for coloring. Let's dive in. We're starting with a page that I've already flatted. If you want to learn more about the flatting process, check out my previous tutorial. Let's set up our layers. First, copy your flats layer and rename it Colors. Next, create a new layer. Set the mode to multiply, name it Shadows, and lower the opacity to 60-65%. Then create another layer, set it to soft light mode, and name it Highlights. Finally, create a layer in Add/Glow mode, and name it Highlights 2. Make sure all of these layers are stacked below the inks layer as shown on screen, and we're all ready to go. On the colors layer, I adjust the flat colors to their final base tones. I do this by selecting the colors with the color picker and replacing the desired areas with the bucket fill tool. I forgot to add an additional layer, so I'll add that now. Above everything, I add a new layer labeled Palette. This is where I'll store my shadow and highlight colors for quick reference. For most images, I'll use complementary colors, and orange for highlights and blue for shadows. I then mark those colors on the palette using a solid pen tool for later reference. Here's where we start shading. Using the wand auto selection tool, I select the silhouette of the character from the silhouette layer. On the shadows layer, I fill the entire selection with shadow color using the bucket fill tool. Now you can see that the multiply mode and the reduced opacity ensures the shadow layer darkens the base colors without completely masking them. Now we move on to the light source rendering. I use a subtractive method to shape the shadows. With the lasso tool, I outline the areas I want to remove shadows. On the shadows layer, I use a soft round brush set to transparency and paint away the shadows, keeping the light source in mind. For this piece, I imagine the light is coming from above and to the right. This step defines the forms of each shape while breaking it all down to their base shapes: spheres, cylinders, cubes, and so on. It doesn't need to look perfect, we're just blocking in the light and shadows at this stage. Once the basic shapes are blocked in, I use the blending tool to smooth out any transitions between light and shadow. If something looks off, I'll go back and adjust it by either adding or removing more shadow. Don't hesitate to use references and continue studies on anatomy and understanding how light interacts with forms. Next, I move on to the hair. I select the hair area by using the wand tool on the flats layer. Switching back to the shadows layer, I lightly block in shadows using the soft round brush. Then I refine the strands with either a pen tool or a custom hairbrush tool, keeping the light source in mind. I then like to make a final pass through the whole image using a pen tool on transparency to run through touching up all the brightest spots of the highlights and then blending those in. Now let's add some highlights to make the image pop. Select the image from the silhouette layer, and using the wand selection tool, I'll select the image. Then I use Ctrl, Alt, click on the shadows layer to deselect any shadowed areas. Then moving to the highlights layer, I fill the image with a highlight color using the bucket fill tool. I'll adjust the opacity to ensure the highlights are more subtle and natural. Now time for a little extra glow. I'll use my wand tool and reference back to the flats layer to select specific areas so I don't accidentally overflow the highlights or glow into unintended areas. On highlights 2 layer, I'll use the airbrush tool to lightly enhance key areas closer to the light source. I then play around with the opacity and land on about 50%. I make sure to do this for the hair area as well. For the finishing touches, I'll use a texture layer on low opacity above the colors layer and clip it to the layer below. Making it a clipping layer just ensures that any marks that we make will only be visible on the layer below and only where there's already color to begin with. Adding a red tint along the transitions between shadows and highlights, this is known as the terminator, using an airbrush can bring more depth and realism to the skin tones. I like to add additional subtle textures like freckles, blemishes, or color variations using various texture brushes. I'll put a link in the description for some custom brush packs that I find helpful. And that's it. Here's the final image. If you found this tutorial helpful, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really helps with the visibility of this channel. Remember, this is just one of many approaches to digital coloring. Experiment with different techniques, tools, and styles to find what works best for you. And let me know in the comments if there's anything else you'd like to see me cover. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.